This is the tale of the age-long flowering of what some have seen fit to call the Irish mind. It's a story where myth and legend sit proudly side by side with history and culture, intermingling and cross-fertilizing to create a lush tapestry full of semi-imagined experiences, spawning some of the most enriching storytelling on earth. This poetic interweaving of myth, imagination, history and tradition is now seen by many as irrelevant, the object of ridicule and scorn. For others, however, this way of thinking has never been more relevant or necessary in an increasingly spiritually impoverished world. Here, unlike with the Celtic Tyrannus or the Hebrew Jehovah, is a different idea of a meeting between the human and the divine. Take the encounter on the high seas between the hero Bran and the ancient god Manannán mac Lir. There are no thunderbolts, no fearsome demands for obedience, only amazement and wonder. Amazement as the Lord of the Sea, bestriding his horse-drawn chariot, hails Bran on the open waters. Wonder as joyfully he tutors Bran on being at one with nature, imaginatively and spiritually. For Bran learns that he travels over no mere water, but upon an open plain bedecked with flowers, over which many invisible travellers pass freely. Clutching a silver branch bearing magical fruit, Bran is initiated into an epic voyage of discovery by the haunting, gentle beauty of song. A musical branch rather than a stern commandment. These mysterious ancient moments remind us of the possibility of a different way of perceiving life, a different way of being in the world. So let's journey back to remote antiquity, back to the time of myth, and examine how, through the ensuing ages, this silver branch seeing has fared at the hands of history. Who they were, or how the first people came to Ireland, remains shrouded in mystery. However, about 9,000 years ago, following the Great Displacement at the end of the last ice age, the myths tell us several waves of immigrants rolled up on Irish shores, including perhaps the legendary Tuatha Dé Danann. By 4000 BC, right across northwestern Europe, an extraordinary culture was flourishing, one that patterned the landscape with stone monuments capable of surveying the passage of the celestial heavens as well as marking the passing of valued elders. In Ireland, at sites such as Newgrange and Tara, this brilliant culture reached its height, and its fame travelled far and wide. The fragmentary remains from these distant times still resonate with the memory of a people whose goddess-honouring culture lived at one with the natural order, one which chose to pass on its shamanic wisdom through a rich array of myths and legends. Many of these stories survived the transition into the Bronze and Iron Ages, where the new inheritors of Ireland wedded them with their own partiality for tales of martial prowess and fearless heroism. It's from this time that we learn of the meeting of Bran and Manannán. of the primordial battle of Lugh, of Balor of the Evil Eye, and of the love quest of Mither and Eoin. Magical tales of voyage and transformation, unrivaled until the time of Homer and Ovid. As Europe emerged into the age of history, influences from the Middle East began to be felt in the far-flung corners of the continent. Precious jewellery from ancient Egypt has been discovered in tomb mounds in Ireland, leading some to speculate on contact with this richly mythical culture. Others, such as the Greeks, were also influenced by the great pyramid builders along the Nile. As 5th century BC Hellenic culture absorbed the many primordial myths of ancient Europe, it began to generate the next influential wave of mythical thought, one which spread north into Celticized regions, eventually reaching Ireland via subtle, winding paths. There is much controversy surrounding the northward movement of the Iron Age Celts. Whatever the truth, Ireland in the 5th century BC was a more martial and harder-tongued place. Gone was the rule of the goddess. Fierce kings ruled Ireland now, along with thunderbolt-wielding gods and a more patriarchal culture. Enamoured with warrior heroes, this age echoed to the clash of arms and the dash of those courageous in battle. This was the time of Cuchulainn, the godlike warrior who bestrides the Táin. An epic tale of cattle rustling, populated by ferocious warlords and frenzied warrior queens. In the passion of these combative myths, we can sense the same never-say-die spirit that drives on today's Gaelic football or our hurling champion. The archetype of the fighting Irish has a long ancestry. The next significant continent cleaver, the Romans, never made it in person to Ireland. We may have much to thank for this, for their preferred model for subduing those they conquered was the systematic erasing of the indigenous culture, turning everyone into citizens of a single Romanized world. While the rest of Europe learned to subjugate its ancient myths to the iron will of the legion and to the straightening line of Latin reason, the Irish were left alone. Through the rise and fall of empire, the Silver Branch mind remained fertile and fruitful. It may have had to adapt to the way of the sword, but it continued to put out a rich harvest. Safe in their halls, the bards and druids still honoured and passed on the wisdoms learnt of old. The first real threat to this inheritance, and yet paradoxically its greatest champion, the Christian monk, arrived ashore on the east coast in the 5th century AD. The writing skills he brought began the slow but irreversible process of taming the free-flowing oral tradition, for the new god who came with them demanded no deity be worshipped, but he. The many gods had no choice but to flee before the determined onslaught of this self-proclaimed, omnipotent master of the word. Yet for a time, this jeopardy was to lie far off in the future, as the Christianity that first emerged was a joyous combination of the pagan and the orthodox. Immersed in a respectful love for nature and enamored of the spiral and the circle, this homely religion lovingly collated a great body of ancient folklore into stunningly illuminated books that have become a byword for all that is most worthy about high Gaelic culture. It is from this time that we also hear of the great Irish saints, St. Patrick, St. Columcille, and St. Bridget, all in their own way touched by the spirit of Silver Branch seeing. The coming together of megalithic, Celtic, and Christian imaginings bequeathed a much marvelled at tapestry of knowledge, scholarship, art, and poetry. During a dark time for the rest of Europe, the land of saints and scholars saw to it that the flame of civilization burned brightly. But this second golden age could not last unmarred for long. By 800 AD, a new maritime power had emerged in the north and was stretching its ravenous wings. For 200 years, Viking longboats were to ransack and plunder monastery, town, and homestead. These were troubled times, and it's likely that much of value was lost forever in the smoke from the looters' flames. Yet even in apparent darkness do great stories seed in the minds of men. For it's likely that the daring deeds of Fionn and the Fianna grew to prominence at this time, offering hope to all that the intruders would eventually be defeated. Then came an invader no story could send packing: the Normans. Having subdued Anglo-Saxon England, they turned their martial eye on Ireland. With them came castle building, Gothic architecture, and the new imperial language of Anglo-French that we know today as English. Over time, this arrival, more than any other before, was to radically change the shape of the branch and the fortune of those who still sought to live by it. Still, not all was ill. They also brought with them amour courtois, the poetry of courtly love, a joyful reawakening of reverence for the goddess and her benign influence. And as Norman settlers made land, so did their folk stories, many of which had survived since the days of old Europe and would thus marry well with Silver Branch memory. A keen example of this is the royal children transformed into swans legend, which we know today as the Children of Lear. In the nurturing hands of the native bards, the themes of loss and exile which this moving tale portrays take on a profound poignancy, shaping it into one of our best-loved folk tales. Still, despite the ability of the Silver Branch mind to bend and adapt, here were the first signs of a wilting under the strain. The authoritarian, centralizing instinct of the Norman was to spell the end for the native monasteries. With their passing, the unique spirit of Celtic Christianity was extinguished in all but the minds of the people. Yet somehow the old poetry schools lived on. In spring, at the bidding of the first cuckoo call, the eager student would make his way to the secret home of a learned poet.
Me brí in linne, me brí dána, me ga vibe faras fiochta, me die jalvas de chaun kona. Ke glehes klocher sleve, ke de hagar eska, ke moralig finne grene, ke verboer o hig terach.
There he would remain until the onset of winter, learning old myths and legends, and studying the intricate pathways of the lyric mind. By the end of 7 summers, he might even have earned the right to call himself a bard. By the 17th century, following the turmoil of the Tudor Wars, the old language went into steep decline and the poets were reduced to poverty. Yet the people did not abandon their ways entirely. The travelling seer could still find a welcome hearth, a plate of broth, and an eager ear ready and willing to feast again on the great tales of old. The Scolaire Bocht, the poor scholar of 18th century Ireland, may have been hard-pressed to rub two coins together, but he had his bag full of books and his mind full of wonders. By the 19th century, the air of Europe was thick with the smoke of self-proclaimed progress, driven on to a frenzy of change by the fires of industrialization. This great upheaval pretty much passed Ireland by. Beyond the Pale, rural life went on largely untouched, and the oral ways, despite the upheaval of the previous centuries, were to survive the heady march to enlightenment and the materialistic view of the new sciences that was so busy transfixing the rest of Europe. Yet the ancient traditions of the Irish were not to be spared the open scorn of the newly enlightened. For poet Matthew Arnold, the Irish were fantasizers, peddlers of ballads, mysteries, and dreams, but ultimately incompetent when it came to responsibly organizing their boundless fantasies. For Disraeli, the Irish were this wild, reckless, indolent, and superstitious race. Others were even more scathing, referring to the human chimpanzees that were said to populate that horrible country. The oral path was now to be dismissed as an unwanted inheritance, a relic from a darker and backward time, one that the great cause of universal education would soon thankfully plough under. Across the Western world, the old wisdoms were thus recklessly abandoned in a lemming-like rush to conformist modernity. The few dissenting voices of disquiet drowned out by the triumph of the new consensus. So effective was this process that by the 20th century, the literary theorist Walter Benjamin could draw sad notice to the unforeseen consequences. The art of storytelling is coming to an end. Less and less frequently do we encounter people with the ability to tell a story. It is as if something that seemed inalienable to us, the securest among our possessions, were taken from us. The ability to exchange experiences. So, with our journey through the ages almost complete, where do we find ourselves? As the 21st century struggles to break free of the fretful grasp of its predecessor, with its calamitous world wars and abhorrent final solutions, we find ourselves inhabiting a world whose very existence is under threat. The much vaunted narratives of modernity have clearly failed us. All of the big stories, be they ideological or pious, stand thus accused. Even the Enlightenment itself, stripped of their authority, divested of promise and hope. It is little wonder that more and more thinkers are turning once more to the Silver Branch way for inspiration and regeneration. What they are discovering is that the path of the truly rooted story is never prescriptive. Its beauty lies in its constant willingness to suggest, to enchant, to echo, and to chime. Its attraction is that rather than make statements or dictate, it offers a myriad differing yet interconnecting courses down which the adventurous mind may travel, offering rare opportunities to connect with an ageless stream of consciousness far beyond the limiting boundaries of the merely rational mind. Perhaps the time has come for our much maligned mythic and folkloric roots to once more put forth their revitalizing shoots and bring fresh life and invigoration to these troubled shores.